What if the real danger on your next hike isn't a bear or a fall, but something no one can explain? These chilling stories come from real places, trails, ridges, and work sites where people disappeared, were found dead, or claimed to see something huge, fast, and not quite human. From snapped bikes and crushed ribs to eerie howls in the dark, each tale leaves more questions than answers. Officials often blame wild animals, but locals and survivors tell a different story. On July 7, 2024, in Washington County, Virginia, the morning air was warm and still as sunlight filtered through the tall trees of the Appalachian Trail. The trail, known for its quiet beauty and long, winding paths, stretched across the landscape like a ribbon pulled tight between the hills. On that summer day, 3 cyclists set out early from the northern access point. Among them were Nolan Rivers and Patrick Hale, both in their early 30s, longtime friends and weekend adventurers. Nolan worked as a graphic designer in a nearby town. He was known for his quiet nature and love for photography. He often brought a small camera along, capturing the changing light through the leaves. Patrick, by contrast, was a middle school gym teacher, energetic and outgoing, always encouraging others to get outside. The two had met during a local charity ride years ago and had since explored trails all across Virginia. This ride was meant to be simple, a short loop into one of the less crowded stretches of the trail, then back before lunch. They had checked the weather, packed water, and loaded their bikes into the back of a pickup before heading out. A third cyclist, Marcus Webb, joined them, a newer friend who had only recently moved to the area. He was quieter, more cautious, but eager to see what the trail offered. The morning passed without trouble. The trail was dry, the sun filtered softly through the branches, and the only sounds were birds and the crunch of tires over gravel. At one point, Marcus slowed down. He felt like something was watching them. The trees felt closer. Shadows stretched longer than they should. He said nothing, but stayed behind the others. As they reached a narrower stretch between dense brush, Nolan and Patrick sped ahead. Marcus, lagging behind, lost sight of them around a bend. Then he heard a sound, loud and sharp, like wood snapping. Birds scattered into the sky. Another sound followed, like a heavy body hitting the ground. Marcus rode faster, heart pounding, but when he turned the corner, he found only chaos. One of the bikes was bent in half, its frame twisted, and the chain snapped. The trail ahead was soaked in red, and deep drag marks cut into the earth. Alongside the marks were strange, barefoot prints, wide and long, longer than any boot Marcus had ever seen. He froze, unable to speak or think. Not far away, deeper into the woods, lay more signs of violence. Leaves were scattered. A glove lay torn near the roots of a tree. Everything was silent, no birds, no wind. That afternoon, search teams found both bodies, separated by about 200 yards. One had its chest crushed, the ribs flattened inward as if by great force. The other body was nearly decapitated, the neck torn with brutal precision. Authorities arrived quickly. News spread fast. Officials told the public that a black bear was the likely cause. They said it was rare but possible. Wildlife experts gave cautious statements, and the trail was closed for a week. But Marcus, who had stayed at the scene, shaking, told another story. He remembered what he saw before it all happened. A shape, tall and dark, moving silently between the trees. It had followed them for miles, always just out of sight. Marcus stood still, frozen by fear, unable to make sense of what he had seen. His breath was shallow, and his legs felt heavy. He backed away slowly, turning only when he was sure nothing followed. The path behind him looked darker than before, like the trees themselves had shifted. He rode back toward the parking lot in silence, every crunch of gravel under his tires sounding too loud in the quiet. When he reached the trailhead, 2 hikers had just arrived. They noticed his pale face and trembling hands. One of them called emergency services, while the other helped him sit on a bench near the lot. Marcus tried to explain, but the words came out confused. He could only say there had been an accident and that something terrible had happened. He kept looking back at the trees, as if expecting something to appear again. Police and wildlife officers arrived within the hour. They followed Marcus back to the site where he had seen the broken bike. The trail remained undisturbed since he had fled. They found the same things he had described: the crushed frame, the trail stained dark, the strange prints in the dirt. They moved carefully, calling out for Nolan and Patrick. It was not long before they found the bodies. Authorities confirmed that both cyclists had died, one from a crushed chest and the other from near decapitation. Investigators marked large footprints near both sites, spaced far apart. Some of them led through soft earth, others disappeared into dense brush. The shapes were clear: 5 toes, no claw marks. The tracks looked nothing like those of a bear, but the official statement called it a black bear attack. Wildlife experts gave interviews, saying bears could behave unpredictably and grow aggressive if surprised. Marcus was released that evening after giving his full account. He did not sleep that night. The images replayed in his head again and again. The shape in the trees, the silence, the bike snapped in half. He packed his bags and moved to another town within a week. He told people he needed a break from the woods, but he never said why. Back in Washington County, people talked about the trail more than usual. Some said it had always felt strange, too quiet in certain places. Others remembered old stories about shadows in the woods. Hikers stopped visiting the deeper sections. The area where the incident happened was marked with tape and signs warning visitors to stay alert. The trail remains open today, but few travel that section alone. Local rangers quietly mention that nature has its secrets. Some believe the event was just a wild animal acting out of instinct. Others say it was something else. The prints were too large, the attack was too sudden, and the forest was too quiet afterward. Even now, the Appalachian Trail winds through the trees in silence. The wind still moves the branches, and the shadows stretch long across the ground. But the story of that day is still told in hushed voices, about what was seen, what was found, and what was never explained. On April 18, 1995, the forests of Allegheny County, North Carolina, were still and quiet. The air was cool, and the early signs of spring had just begun to touch the trees with light green. 3 close friends, Jeremy Rook, Tyler Dean, and Isaac Morton, had planned their weekend for months. They wanted to get away from town and explore Devil's Back Ridge, a steep, remote hill in the western edge of the county. Jeremy was 24 and worked part-time at a mechanic shop. Tyler was a few years older and had just finished his welding certification. Isaac, the youngest of the group, worked shifts at a grocery store while taking evening classes. They had known each other since high school and shared a love for the outdoors. Camping trips were common for them. They trusted each other, and all 3 had grown up hiking the trails and ridges of the Blue Ridge foothills. The plan was simple. They would drive out early on Friday, set up camp beneath Devil's Back Ridge, and stay for 2 nights. The spot they picked was far from marked trails, where the land dipped between wooded slopes and rocky ledges. It was quiet, with nothing around but trees, dirt, and sky. They pitched a tent near a flat clearing just before sunset, and made a fire using dry limbs they gathered nearby. That night, the sky was clear, and the stars filled the air above them. The fire crackled, and their laughter echoed into the woods. It was calm, peaceful, nothing felt wrong. But sometime in the dark hours of the night, everything changed. Jeremy, the lightest sleeper among them, was the first to notice the strange sounds. Branches snapping, far off at first, then closer. Heavy footsteps, not fast, but steady. Tyler sat up next, whispering questions that were never answered. Isaac did not wake until the tent shook slightly. They thought it was wind, maybe a falling limb, but there was no wind that night. Outside, they heard something move through the brush. It was big, too big to be a deer. They stayed still, hoping it would pass, but the steps came closer, circling. Then there was silence. Seconds later, a loud snap, like a tree trunk cracking, rang out, followed by crashing and thudding sounds from just beyond the fire pit. Something hit the tent hard, collapsing one side. The friends scrambled to get out. Jeremy was the only one who made it beyond the tree line. He looked back and saw shapes in the dark, large and shifting. He heard something fall, something heavy, and then silence. He waited until morning. Only when the sun rose did he return to the camp. The tent was torn, gear scattered, and the fire pit destroyed. In the soft soil, he saw the print of a bare heel, twice the size of his own. What happened to his friends was not yet clear, but the ridge had changed from a place of adventure to something else, something no one was ready for. The sun had barely risen above the trees when Liam arrived back at the campsite. The light was dim, casting long shadows over the ridge. He stood still, staring at what remained of their shelter. The tent had collapsed. One of the poles was broken clean in half, the fabric torn across the middle. Their bags were scattered across the ground. Some were shredded, others looked like they had been thrown. Liam stepped closer. His boots crunched over broken twigs and crushed leaves. He knelt beside a sleeping bag that had been dragged partway out of the tent. It was empty. Nearby, he noticed the soft ground marked with prints. The heel marks were deep and wide. They were twice the size of his own feet, barefoot. No shoe pattern, just skin and weight. His breath caught in his chest as he followed the tracks. They led toward a narrow trail that ran along the ridge. Something had moved quickly, tearing through branches and brushing against trees. He turned and ran back to the road, calling for help as soon as he reached a payphone near the main route. Search crews arrived within hours. Rangers, police, and volunteers moved through the forest in lines. Dogs were brought to track the missing campers. They followed the scent to the edge of a gully. There, among thick roots and moss-covered stones, they made the discovery. The two missing friends were found in a shallow ditch. One body had its ribs crushed flat. The other lay face down, its limbs bent at strange angles. Neither had claw marks nor bites. It looked like they had been slammed hard, not torn. The forest fell quiet as officers examined the scene. There were no tracks leading away, no drag marks, just damage. Bark torn from trees, rocks disturbed, a few small items. A crushed water bottle, a torn jacket sleeve, lay scattered nearby. Wildlife experts were called in. They reviewed the evidence and claimed it might have been a freak bear attack, though they admitted it was strange. No teeth punctures, no claw slashes, and the prints found earlier were unlike any bear they had seen. Authorities closed the case without further investigation. The third camper, Liam, refused to speak publicly. He left Allegheny County a month later. Friends said he struggled to sleep and avoided the woods completely. He never camped again. Local whispers grew louder in the years that followed. People in town remembered old stories about shadows on the ridge, of strange cries in the hills, of prints found near creek beds with no tracks leading to or from them. Devil's Back Ridge became known as a place to avoid after dark. A warning sign was placed near the trailhead. It warned of unstable ground and wildlife. But those who knew the story said it was not the ground people should fear. And some still say that if you walk too far past the tree line, something might be waiting, tall, silent, and stronger than anything you can see. On October 12, 1981, in Delta County, Colorado, the air above Cold Ridge Hollow was cold and still. The sky was cloudy, and the wind moved slowly across the open land. This part of the county was known for its open valleys and dry gulches. Few people came out this far unless they had a reason. That week, two geologists were studying the land near an old riverbed, trying to map the rock layers and check for signs of mineral shifts. Their work was part of a long-term research plan to better understand the soil movement near the flatlands. The two men, Thomas Meeks and Gary Fallon, had worked together before. Thomas was 44 and had spent over 20 years working in field geology. He had a calm voice and moved slowly, always writing in his notebook. Gary was younger, just 33, with wide eyes and steady hands. He was known for his strong sense of direction and could always find his way back, even in deep terrain. Both were used to spending nights in tents and walking long stretches of rough ground with heavy packs. That morning, they had set up near a small ridge above the flats. The place was dry with patches of yellow grass, and the edge dropped sharply into a gulch below. They carried basic gear, sample tools, a radio, and a thermos of coffee. The sun had not yet come up fully, and the area was quiet. As they began their work, the two men noticed something strange. A thick, heavy smell began to drift over the ridge. It was sharp, almost like burnt hair. At first, they thought it might be an animal nearby, but the scent grew worse. They paused their work and looked around. That was when they heard it. A loud cracking sound, like a large branch breaking under weight. Then another. The sound echoed in the open space, deep and far away, but moving closer. They radioed their base camp to report the smell and the sounds. Their voices were tight. Something felt wrong. The team back at the station marked the call and waited for follow-up, but no second call came. The next response was a rescue team, sent out when no more contact came through after an hour. When they arrived, they found only scattered gear near the ridge. One backpack was torn open, and papers were blowing in the wind. Footprints moved around the edge of the ridge, not from boots, but wide, bare feet pressed deeply into the dirt. Each step was nearly twice the size of a man's foot and spaced far apart. The shape of the toes was clear, and the stride did not match anything familiar. Further down, near the edge of the gulch, they found one of the geologists. The body was torn and tossed into the gulch. His gear was missing, and his radio had been crushed flat. The body showed no clear claw marks or bite wounds, but the ribs were pushed inward. It looked like he had been grabbed and slammed against something hard. There were bruises and deep marks from force, but not from teeth. The second geologist was nowhere to be found. The team searched the area for hours, calling his name and tracking the ground. There were no signs of his gear, and no blood trails led away. The wide footprints circled the ridge but did not return. It was as if the ground had swallowed him. The second geologist was never found. The wind kept blowing, and the land grew quiet again. On October 12, 1981, as dawn painted the Colorado sky in pale orange, the silence over Coldridge Hollow remained undisturbed, except for the buzzing of search helicopters. Rescue teams had arrived before sunrise, drawn to the area after a chilling radio call from two geologists the day before. The call, short and panicked, mentioned a strange odor like burned hair and loud cracking sounds in the distance. The message had ended abruptly, and further attempts at contact failed. The geologists were identified as Raymond Ellis and Paul Strickland. Raymond, age 43, was a seasoned field expert with over 20 years of experience studying mountain soil formations. Paul, 37, was new to the team, but known for his sharp instincts and dedication. They had been working together for a few months, mapping underground layers and taking core samples near the gulches outside Delta County. The search party reached the site marked on the geologist's last transmission. The area was uneven, rocky, and bordered by narrow cliffs. Equipment was scattered around: torn tents, a crushed water canister, and measuring tools bent out of shape. A wide trail of dirt had been disturbed not far from the mess. It was as if something heavy had moved through, dragging or sweeping the ground clean in odd patches. A bitter smell hung in the air. Only one body was recovered. It had been torn apart and thrown into a gulch, lying twisted at an unnatural angle below the rocky edge. Nearby, investigators found prints spaced in strange symmetry. Each mark was large, longer than any boot, and shaped like a bare foot. They appeared in pairs, with no signs of crawling or dragging. Wildlife officers examined the scene and initially proposed a mountain lion attack, but several features did not match. There were no claw punctures, bite marks, or blood trail leading away from the main site. One ranger quietly told a colleague that lions do not leave prints with clear 2-inch heel shapes. The second geologist, Paul Strickland, was never found. Search efforts expanded across Coldridge Hollow. Teams followed the strange tracks until they disappeared into a dry basin of loose rock. Dogs brought in for scent detection refused to follow past a certain point. The ground carried no further sign of human movement. Flyers were posted, and interviews were held with nearby hikers, but no one reported anything useful. Raymond's family arrived 2 days later. They were devastated and confused. They had expected bad news, but the details they heard were worse than imagined. Paul's family waited longer, hoping he might still be found, but days turned into weeks with no change. News reports were vague. Officials insisted a wild animal had likely been involved, though they could not agree on what kind. The case was closed as an accident. No one reopened it. Locals in Delta County began calling the area cursed. Old stories surfaced again, ones about strange shapes in the fog and heavy breathing heard in the dark. People started avoiding the ridges near the gulch, especially after nightfall. And though time passed, some still remember that cold October morning when something left behind more questions than answers, and only one man returned from the flats. On August 5, 2003, in Huron County, Ontario, the night air around Ashburn Quarry was still and humid. The sky held no stars, only low clouds that pressed down on the land like a blanket. The quarry, set a few kilometers outside a farming village, was busy during the day but empty and silent at night, except for a small crew assigned to equipment maintenance and security patrol. Among them was a man named Carl Hinton. He was 46, lived in Goderic with his wife and daughter, and had worked in mining and stone transport for over 2 decades. Carl was experienced with machines, loaders, and crushers. People said he was careful, methodical, and never took shortcuts. He had been with Ashburn Quarry for 6 years, always steady, always quiet. That night, Carl was on a maintenance shift with one other worker, a younger man named Dylan Price. The two had separate duties. Carl inspected the loaders and equipment parked by the main slope, while Dylan handled the lighting system and yard checks from a small office trailer near the gate. The quarry itself was wide and deep, with layered gravel roads snaking down into the pit. It was surrounded by high banks of crushed stone, and floodlights were mounted on towers around the perimeter. These lights often flickered during bad weather, but that night the forecast was clear. Around midnight, Dylan noticed something strange. One of the yard lights blinked out, then came back, then went off again. He wrote it off as a loose wire. Just before 1 in the morning, Dylan heard a sharp static burst over the site's walkie system, then silence. He stepped outside the trailer and called Carl's name into the radio, but there was no reply. A cold draft moved across the gravel. The light over the far slope blinked once more and went dark. Dylan walked out toward the loader area. He had barely crossed the middle lot when he froze. Something massive moved past him, fast, tall, and dark. He could not see its full shape, only the speed and size. It ran on 2 legs, faster than any human, and vanished behind the equipment row. Dylan backed up and radioed the front desk in a panic, asking for backup. Emergency services arrived within the hour. They found Dylan shaking, standing near the main loader unit. He pointed to the machine without speaking. The crew moved forward and saw what he could not explain. Carl Hinton's body was impaled on the forward loader blade. His torso was torn open and crushed, twisted unnaturally, and lifted several feet off the ground. The scene showed no tire marks or signs of a crash, no claw wounds or animal bite marks, just massive blunt force and internal collapse. The area around the loader was a mess of broken gravel and dust. Several strange footprints circled the scene. These were large, shaped like bare human feet, but each step was far too long. The heel impressions were deep, the toes spread unusually wide. They were spaced in perfect walking lines, as if whatever had walked there moved upright. Security reviewed footage from 2 cameras mounted on the tool shed and loading office. The feeds cut out seconds before Carl's last known check-in. One showed the lights flickering, the other turned to static. Officials ruled the death an industrial accident. They blamed poor lighting and assumed Carl slipped or fell while inspecting the loader. No foul play was listed. Wildlife experts said perhaps he had startled a large animal like a moose or bear, but Dylan was never the same. The quarry shut down for 2 days. The quarry stayed closed for a full day after the incident. Yellow tape circled the loader, and the crew was told to wait for clearance before returning to work. Word spread quickly. Some workers refused to come back, even before the full cleanup was done. The gravel slope where the body had been found remained untouched. A pile of red-stained soil marked the spot. Authorities worked quietly. Official reports listed the cause as equipment malfunction, but several staff had questions. The loader was shut off when the body was found, and no signs pointed to an accident during operation. No one admitted seeing what had happened, yet many whispered that something large had moved in the dark. One worker was found impaled against the loader blade, torso split and crushed. Emergency responders noted odd details. Around the scene, the gravel bore prints too long for a man, each one pressed deep into the earth. The footprints were spaced evenly, like strides from a tall being. No one could match the shape to any boot or known animal. Officials photographed the site but refused to share the images with staff. Security footage showed only flickering lights and static. One camera faced the shack, but its feed jumped several seconds during the time frame in question. That same camera had worked without fail the night before. Technicians blamed power surge interference, though no issues were found in the power lines. Inside the shack, a chair was knocked over, and a mug lay shattered on the floor. A second worker later told a supervisor what he had seen. He said a large figure moved past the shack just as the lights flickered. It was too fast and too tall to be a man. He quit that same week and left town. No contact information was left behind. Only one body was recovered. The site resumed limited operations 2 days later. Crews returned, but most avoided the gravel slope. The loader was replaced, and workers moved in groups. Whispers continued about the tracks and how deep they had gone into the ground. Some said the dirt had hardened around them, as if the heat from the being had baked the earth beneath each step. No animals were seen in the area for several days. Birds stopped nesting nearby, and a coyote den along the quarry's edge was found abandoned. Wildlife officers claimed a mountain lion might have moved through, though no fur or prints were found. The quarry owner gave a short statement, saying safety procedures would be reviewed. He declined to answer questions about the size of the tracks or the missing camera footage. One employee kept copies of the incident report and later shared it with a friend. That friend passed it to a local writer who specialized in unsolved industrial accidents. Nothing ever came of the follow-up. The quarry still operates today, but no one works alone on night shifts anymore. The loader involved in the death was scrapped and never spoken of again, and Coldridge Hollow remains quiet, holding their secrets deep under the water gravel. On March 14, 2010, in Galway County, Ireland, the air was cold and still around the edges of a quiet reservoir tucked between low hills and farmland. The water sat dark and flat, not far from the narrow footpaths where locals sometimes walked their dogs or fished alone. That evening, heavy clouds covered the sky, and the wind barely moved the rushes along the shore. Tom Kearney, a retired rail worker in his early 60s, spent most of his evenings near the reservoir's west bank. He enjoyed fishing alone, bringing just a folding chair, his rod, and a headlamp to guide him in the dim light. He had fished these waters for years and knew them better than anyone. His small home stood just over the ridge, where he lived with his sister and their dog. That night, Tom settled near the reed bed, the wind carrying the scent of cold water and moss. Hours passed without much movement, but just before midnight, something made him turn. A strong, foul smell reached his nose, something sharp and bitter, like burnt hair mixed with wet fur. It was not a normal scent from the lake or fields. He turned his headlamp toward the reeds, expecting to see a badger or fox. Instead, he saw a shape crouched low in the tall rushes. It was still at first, dark and wide. Then it rose up slowly. It stood higher than any man Tom had ever seen. The light from his headlamp caught the shine of two amber-colored eyes staring back at him. The figure did not move or speak, it only watched. Tom backed away, dropping his fishing rod, and quickly made his way uphill. At the same time, along the south footpath of the same reservoir, a man named Darren Fennell was walking his dog. He often walked late, enjoying the quiet and letting his large black lab run free on the trail. He lived in a cottage nearby and knew the land well. He had done this walk many times without worry. That night, Darren never returned home. The next morning, his dog was found circling a patch of reeds beside the reservoir. The animal was scared, its fur raised, and it refused to leave the spot. Volunteers and local police arrived to search the area. Just before noon, they found the body. Darren Fennell's body was discovered at the base of a shallow gulch, partly hidden beneath crushed rushes. His jaw was shattered. His arms were missing. His torso had been buried under flattened plants, as if something heavy had slammed it down. The site around him had strange signs. The ground was pressed with large, deep prints that looked human in shape, but were far too long and spaced far apart. Each print sank deep into the soft mud, as though made by something heavy. They ran in a straight line, almost like steps, but with perfect symmetry. No drag marks, no sign of a struggle, just wide, clean impressions from the reeds to the gulch's edge. Wildlife officers arrived later that day and walked the perimeter. They gave a quick explanation, telling reporters the death was caused by a badger set collapse. a hidden hole that gave way beneath Darren's feet. They said the injuries may have come from the fall or from animals afterward, but one older ranger stepped away from the group. Quietly, to another officer, he said, "Lions don't leave 2-inch heel marks." After the discovery of Darren's body, the area near the reservoir changed. Tape was tied across the main trail, and a sign was placed warning people to keep out while the land was inspected. Officials returned in small groups, but none stayed long. Some walked the same path again, measuring the tracks and checking the ground. The damage to the reeds around the gulch showed no usual pattern. There were no claw marks, no bite wounds, no fur stuck to the broken stems, and though some claimed a badger hole could cause a fall, none were found near the gulch. The earth was firm, not caved in. The injuries were not from a slide or stumble. Something else had happened. Only one body was recovered, torn and tossed into a gulch. The second geologist was still missing. Days passed, and the search widened. Drones flew overhead, and boats skimmed the reservoir edges. Dogs were brought in again, but nothing was found. No clothing, no footprints, no blood. The reeds had returned to stillness, and the water looked calm again. There were no signs of the second man at all. Locals who lived near the shore began staying indoors after dark. A few said they had noticed strange things before, odd calls from the far bank or shapes moving quickly near the trees. Most had ignored it, but now they kept their doors locked at night. Some moved livestock away from the reservoir fence. One woman sold her boat and never returned to the water again. Fishermen began using other lakes. The man who had seen the dark figure never went back to his usual spot. He moved to another pier 3 villages away. He left behind his tackle box and told neighbors he no longer trusted the water at Coldwater Flats. No new reports were made for months, but people whispered. A child claimed to see something huge standing still in the reeds one foggy morning. Another man said his sheep refused to graze near the gulch path, but no one filed anything official. They remembered what happened the last time and kept quiet. In the spring, the trail reopened. The tape came down, and the signs were taken away. The case was marked as closed. The official report named a possible mountain lion attack, with loss of body due to water or scavengers. But few believed that. One body had been found with a jaw shattered, arms missing, and the torso buried beneath flattened rushes. Many who knew the land said no lion would leave the body like that, and lions were not common in that part of Ireland. They had not been seen for decades. The heel marks in the soil stayed in memory, even if the photos were filed away. No one explained those prints. The reservoir still looks quiet from above, but fewer people walk its paths now. The grass grows longer, and the rushes bend only with the wind, and some believe something else still waits in the reeds. On January 22, 2016, the morning air over the Otago region in South Island, New Zealand, was calm and cold. A remote trail that wound through thick bushland and steep ridges had seen only a few backpackers that week. Among them was a woman named Laura Byrne. She was 33 years old and had arrived from Dunedin 2 days earlier. She loved hiking alone. Her journal was filled with checklists, trail names, and plant drawings. Hiking helped her feel calm, far from city noise. This trip was her 6th long trek of the season. She told a friend she would be back by the weekend. Her backpack was light, and her gear was packed tight. She had a tent, food, maps, and a small radio. The trail passed through rough paths and narrow ridges with thick tree cover on both sides. That night, she pitched her tent near a bend in the trail where the ground flattened out. She set up her camp just before sunset and noted in her journal that everything seemed fine. Later that night, others camping nearby heard strange howls. The sound came in pairs, one high and one low, echoing through the trees. It did not match any bird or animal found in the region. It was too deep, too long, and seemed to move fast through the hills. A couple camping farther down the trail whispered that it gave them chills. Still, no one left their tents. At sunrise, Laura's tent was still zipped, but her sleeping bag was empty. Her pack was found undisturbed, and nothing seemed stolen. A few hikers on the track noticed something strange off the trail, a line of drag marks in the mud, leading away from her camp. They followed it carefully, calling her name. About 60 feet from the trail, through twisted trees and sharp brush, they stopped. There, at the edge of a slope covered in rushes and moss, they found what they had feared. Laura's body was buried halfway beneath the thick reeds. Her jaw was broken in several places, and both arms were missing. Her back was bent in an unnatural curve, and the dirt around her was packed tight. There was no sign of a fall from a high place, and no loose rocks nearby. Her gear, untouched at the campsite, showed no sign of a robbery or panic escape. Later, investigators searched the area. They found no claw marks, no bite wounds, and no scratch trails leading away. But near her camp, in the softer mud, they found something else. Pressed deep in the soil were large toe impressions. They were shaped like human feet, but longer and wider. Each one was spaced far apart, suggesting heavy steps and fast movement. No other prints were found. Wildlife officials claimed it may have been an accident, but others began to wonder what kind of accident left footprints that size. News of the incident traveled fast. Local hikers who used the remote trail were shocked. Many had walked those same paths for years without trouble. The search team returned for more checks, hoping to find clues left behind. But no other prints were found. The trail near the campsite remained quiet. The drag marks had faded by the second day, washed out by light rain that fell overnight. Some of the searchers stayed longer, walking deeper into the woods, but nothing more was recovered. Laura's body was taken to the nearest medical center. The report said she died from a broken spine and severe blunt force to the chest and neck. The missing arms were never found. The coroner noted strange bruising along her ribs and deep compression injuries that did not match a fall or strike from a known animal. No mountain goat or wild pig in that region had caused such damage before. There were no teeth marks. There were no claw wounds. The ruling said accidental fall, but many quietly doubted it. The other hikers who had heard the strange sounds shared their stories later. They explained how the howls rose and fell like two voices joined into one. They described them as echoing too widely for any normal animal. Wildlife officers said it could have been wind bouncing between slopes, but no one else had ever heard wind move that way in the remote trail area before. A few visitors who stayed in the huts near the trail decided to leave early. One tracker said he had never seen toe impressions like the ones found near Laura's camp. They were shaped like human feet, but longer and set too far apart. He said they sank too deep into the earth to be made by anyone barefoot. Some believed it was a hoax. Others said the trail had always felt strange near that section, especially near dusk. Laura's family held a quiet memorial. They visited the trail once, placing flowers near the clearing where her camp had been. Her gear was returned, still zipped and clean, untouched by animals or weather. Her journal had no final entry, just the one from the day before, with a sketch of a tree and a note about the soft wind through the leaves. Local officials placed new signs near the trail start. The boards asked hikers to stay close to marked paths and to avoid camping alone. They added new maps with updated caution zones. But even with warnings, some still chose to walk there. They said the trail was beautiful and that accidents can happen anywhere. Still, people talked. Some whispered about the deep marks in the ground. Others remembered the double howls that cut through the quiet, and a few would glance toward the trees before stepping off the gravel, as if checking to see if something was waiting between the trunks. The remote trail remains open, but some paths now feel heavier beneath the boots of those who return.